The people who provide support, if they're at work worrying about paying their bills, keeping their electricity on, feeding their family, how are they going to have their head in the game for some of the complex expectations we have for them?
The wages are increasing, but they are still far from a living wage. So I think that we should pat ourselves on the back, and states should pat themselves on the back for raising awareness, raising wages, increasing benefits, training, etc. But there's a long way to go to support a workforce that is not living in poverty.
We see a big portion of the DSP workforce turnover in that first year of employment. People come in the door, providers invest a lot of time, money, and resources into orientation, training, getting them on the job, and the turnover's huge.
Welcome to IDD Leader, where human services leaders grow their impact, lead with heart, and build the workplaces our field deserves. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. How are things going with the workforce at your organization? If you were sitting across a table from me right now, that's probably what I'd be asking. And it may be a question you're asking yourself. You may also be asking, how does our workforce compare to other organizations across the state or across the country? And good news, today's guests are going to be able to shed light especially on that second question of how does it compare. I'm honored to have on the show Laura Vegas from the National Association of State Directors on Developmental Disability Services and Dorothy Hiersteiner from Human Services Research Institute. And together, they oversee the National Core Indicators State of the Workforce Study. You may have heard of this. It's a comprehensive research study that looks at turnover, tenure, and various workforce issues specifically for direct support professionals at IDD providers. In fact, this study that they oversee has been and continues to be used to shape policy at the state level and even at the federal level. In other words, it's kind of a big deal. But it's also a really useful tool for you at the provider level to be able to assess how are things going at our agency compared to others, and what trends should we be looking for, or things that are happening on sort of that macro picture that are going to end up affecting us, or maybe already are, right here and right now. Well, without further ado, enjoy today's conversation. If you could bust one myth about the DSP workforce that providers or policymakers still believe, what would it be?
It's a great question. I think for me, it would be the idea that working as a DSP is the same as caregiving. I think that there's a lot more that's involved in the work that DSPs do. It's not really an accurate depiction of that role to say that it's the same as, babysitting or caregiving or making sure that people are safe, because what we really hope that DSPs will do is well beyond that, like things like helping people go out into the community, helping people learn to make choices, take risks, learn how to take risks and weigh the pros and cons of things, of things that they want to do, help them learn how to have a household and clean and cook and live the lives that they want to live. So it's so much more than just babysitting, than caregiving. I think that the DSP field, it would benefit the field if that were more commonly known.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I agree, Dorothy, with exactly what you said as the biggest myth. I will say, when I started out my career, I supervised some residential settings, so I did a lot of DSP work. And while it was, it can be like the most rewarding job you ever have in your life, it's complex. It's more than, as Dorothy said, just looking after people. You have to understand interpersonal relationships, and the folks we support sometimes have very complex needs, sometimes complex medical needs, sometimes complex family issues. Sometimes they have dual diagnosis of co-occurring mental health issues and IDD. So it's pretty specialized skill set, and they're not, people who are DSPs are not easily replaced. I know sometimes people think, that's just a low skilled worker. If they leave, we can just bring another person in and put them in their place. But it's way more complex than that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because it's not like you can just throw a warm body in and have everything run seamlessly. I mean, this is the well-being of people's lives that are, and it's honestly, I think it's kind of a strange thing where on the one hand, it can be an entry-level position, but on the other hand, this is not just like running a cashier at a checkout line. I
Mm-mm.
mean, this is much more some of the skills that need to be developed for DSPs who make a career of it, and there are many who do. Does take quite a few advanced skills. Now, listen, before we go too much further on this, let's just back up for a second. Why don't you each introduce yourselves, your roles? You each have some nice acronyms for the places where you work, so maybe give us
Sure.
those, and just a real maybe quick snapshot of what the organization that you work for does.
I'm Laura Vegas. I work for the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services. Um, and our acronym is NASDDDS. We are a membership association, a national membership association, and our members consist of all state DD directors. So the state IDD service delivery systems, the leaders of those systems are our members. And so our job is to really support the states to support people with IDD through their service delivery systems. And my role there is I help Dorothy. We partner together on national core indicators, and I also oversee a national community of practice around supporting families, looking at systems and how we support families of people with IDD. And then I do quite a bit of quality work for state systems.
And I'm Dorothy Hiersteiner. I co-direct National Core Indicators with Laura and my colleague Steph. And I primarily focus on National Core Indicators on intellectual and developmental disabilities, which includes the National Core Indicators NCI State of the Workforce Survey for intellectual and developmental disabilities, which we'll talk about a little bit more. We also have a sister effort, the National Core Indicators on Aging and Physical Disabilities, and they also have a State of the Workforce Survey as well, which I also work on. I am employed by Human Services Research Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and HSRI, as we're called, works on evaluating and implementing public services, human services across the country in various states. So yeah, that's where I work. That's what I do.
Awesome. Yeah. And this part of what I'm so excited about having you guys on the show today is that a lot of the people that we've heard from are a little bit more boots on the ground at the provider level or kind of in that consultant role to providers. And so one of my hopes here, and I'm about to ask you some questions along these lines, is to get some of that bigger picture and to see a little bit what's going on on a broader scale, because well, those are interdependent, of course. What's happening on the micro is affecting the macro, and what's happening on the macro affects the micro. And so
Absolutely.
this is just I'm so thrilled that you're here to share. And so let's just jump right in a little bit with the National Core Indicators, State of the Workforce. If someone's already been researching things along the lines of workforce stability or turnover for DSPs, they probably will have run into it, but it's also very possible that they might not. So for any listener that's not familiar with this, why don't you just kind of paint a picture of what that is and how it's been used or being used?
Sure. So National Core Indicators as a whole is an effort that was designed to help state DD agencies, so the state agencies in the states across the United States that administer services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, help those state agencies understand how their services are working and how people's lives are while they're receiving services. So it's our main survey is the in-person survey, which asks people who are receiving services questions like, do you like where you live? Do you have a job? Do you feel safe? Are you able to make choices in your life? And so these outcomes that are measured using the in-person survey, provides states with information about how their services are doing and where improvements can be made. But as we've been developing that survey and implementing it in the past almost 30 years, we knew that the outcomes that we were seeing, things like, as I mentioned, safety, employment, choice making, community inclusion, etc., were really contingent on a stable and quality workforce. We also knew that there were a lot of challenges being faced by the workforce and the provider base. Lots of high turnover, low tenure, early turnover, lack of benefits, poverty. And we knew that there was not a national standardized data collection effort to collect information on that DSP workforce. There was some data collection on similar workforces through the Bureau of Labor Statistics and some other efforts. But as we mentioned earlier, the DSP workforce is unique. And so we really wanted to better understand some of those challenges. And so in 2014-15, we piloted a survey. The way that the survey works is that states that participate send us a list of the provider agencies that are eligible. So provider agencies that provide supports to adults with IDD through the DD system. And the survey is sent through a portal to those provider agencies via email, and they respond about their DSP workforce. So it includes things like wages, benefits, how long, number of DSPs, how long they've been employed, race and ethnicity, gender, and a lot of really important data points that help states identify where there might be gaps, where they might want to target some workforce development initiatives, whether or not states have used the data to see whether or not rate increases have gone to DSP wages. They've used the data to examine what kinds of recruitment and retention strategies they might be able to support at the state level. The data are also used by the responding provider agencies as well. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Laura.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things, Dorothy. We've heard of course, I've been in this field for more than 30 years, and ever since I've been in this field, there's been an issue with a DSP workforce. We call it a workforce crisis. And so, states were grappling with that, but they didn't have any data to tell their story. So it was all anecdotal. And, when you're going to your legislators and you're talking about state policy and federal policy, it's so important to have data to tell your story. And so there was a real gap, as Dorothy said. And so our state members were really feeling the need to get their arms around what their workforce looked like, and then nationally, what the workforce for IDD looked like. And so that's kind of where the State of the Workforce tool came from.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, it started out where you were aimed at researching more like client outcomes or individuals' outcomes, and then seeing how connected the workforce is to those outcomes, then this other survey and research has developed from there. Okay, and that I mean that really resonates too. A guest I recently just had on kind of explained that you can't help an individual without helping the helpers, or he said it more eloquently than that, but that it doesn't work the person-centered care doesn't happen in a vacuum, I think is how he put it.
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
And so I can see how this be really valuable. So well, in what you've been looking at this data, what's the most encouraging trend that you've seen in recent years?
That's a good question. Well, I hate to say that COVID had a silver lining, but in this case, it may have, in that these workers, DSPs, were finally recognized as essential workers, and there were a lot of efforts from states to support that workforce and finally acknowledge the important role that they play in people's lives. So there was a lot of increased attention to the workforce, a lot of increased attention to the risks and safety concerns of that workforce, but also the benefits that they provide to people who are receiving long-term services and supports. So to me, and that has continued after COVID to a certain extent, where the workforce there's been a lot more attention paid to that workforce, and we're hoping that will continue into the future.
Okay.
Yeah, we're cautiously optimistic about some of the trends we're seeing and some of the data points we collect. For example, over the last few years, we've seen a pretty steady increase in the average wage of direct support professionals, or the median wage of direct support professionals. I can remember it being $12.50 an hour, and now we're up to $17.20 an hour. That's much better, but that's still not enough. But at least we're seeing that upward trend. And another trend we've seen that we're cautiously optimistic about is kind of a downward trend in turnover. Turnover is a huge issue, as you mentioned, Nate, and Dorothy has mentioned. It's costly to provider organizations in so many ways. And I always think about the people who use our services and what it must feel like to depend on someone to come into your home, into your personal space every day, and have that person change so much. What a disruption that must be to your life, and how that would be scary to me. And it takes a while to build trust. So there's just so many issues with turnover. We'd really love to see that continue to trend down. So we're keeping an eye on that, and making some guesses about what's leading to both of those pieces of data, the trends in those data. So we're optimistic about seeing that much.
Well, that's good. I mean, I'm glad to hear that there are some
Yeah,
things moving in the right direction. That's always super encouraging,
yeah, that's true.
especially uh, when you're in the thick of it. You might not be feeling like, hey, that's not happening here yet, but
Yeah,
but still,
yeah.
it's great to know that on a larger scale it is. Kind of on the flip side, are there any sort of bigger red flags that the data is kind of pointing to that providers or even state leaders should be paying attention to right now?
Well, kind of following on what we were just talking about, the wages are increasing, but they are still far from a living wage
Yeah.
in these areas of the country. So I think that we should pat ourselves on the back, and states should pat themselves on the back for raising awareness, raising wages, increasing benefits, training, etc. But there's a long way to go to support a workforce that is not living in poverty.
Yeah, that's huge because, like you said, Nate, the caregivers are the people who provide support. If they're at work worrying about paying their bills, keeping their electricity on, feeding their family, I mean, how are they going to have their head in the game for some of the complex expectations we have for them? Some of the things in the data that I would say is a red flag is the tenure. So we see a big portion of the DSP workforce turnover in that first year of employment. So, it's like people come in the door, providers invest a lot of time, money, and resources into orientation, training, getting them on the job. And the turnover's huge, especially in the first, like from 0 to 3 months, we're seeing, some pretty significant turnover. But between like the 6 months and the 1 year mark, or the 6 month and the 2 year mark, the turnover's huge. So, it makes you wonder, after the training is over with, the initial orientation is over with, like, what kind of support are DSPs getting on the job? Um, After they've been there for a while? Are they being mentored, or do they have good supervision? So that really worries me. That's a huge turnover, and a lot of people that come in to the field and get a bad feeling for the field and leave, and may not ever consider it again. Where if they were properly supported, they may be a lifelong DSP, or just move up within the company. So that's some red flags, I think. And I think providers, along with states, can take a look at what's happening in the beginning of a DSP's employment. So many of the services and supports that are provided now are kind of done in isolation. Like, DSPs sometimes don't all work together in a congregate group home, or they don't all work together in a congregate day service. So they're out in the community isolated. And so where are the opportunities to have that peer support, and scheduled interactions with their supervisor that they really need to be supported in that first year of employment? I think those are important things to look at.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I hear that a lot in conversations with providers. That is like it seems to be kind of a key metric that some providers I've talked to have seen some awesome turnarounds and have really taken some great ground on kind of that first 90 days, first 6 months, first year, and that seems to make a world of difference for them. I guess I was curious, kind of as the next thought that comes to me along those lines is, are there things that states, more at that state level, where they try to kind of address that? Again, my mind immediately goes to sort of the provider level because that's usually who I'm talking with. But is there ways that any states that you can think of are sort of specifically trying to target that, or reward
Yeah,
providers that are doing well, or how's that working?
great question. Go ahead, Laura.
No, I was just going to say some of the things that popped to my mind are, a lot of states have invested quite a bit into DSP training platforms, training programs where it's training beyond the basic first aid and CPR. It's training for the support of the DSP worker themselves, and helping them have these key skills that they need in terms of interacting with people, supporting people with complex needs. So I think those requirements, those training requirements, being more robust, hopefully has helped DSPs feel more supported as a new employee. And then I just keep going back to the provider level on that in that situation. But also if those, and we probably talk about this a little bit later too, but if those training platforms are more like career ladders where people can advance and earn more money the longer they're around for employment, I think those are big incentives too. And the state can really help providers do that by really looking at the rates they're paying for services and supports.
The other, a couple of things that states can do is raise wages, of course, which also would raise starting wages. So that would be a good way to get people to join up and potentially stay in the job. The risk there is when you raise starting wages, but you don't raise
Compression.
wages. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. The wages of people who've been there for a while. And so the starting wages are right up there with the average wage. The people who've been there for a while start thinking, well, why is the work and time that I've put in is not valued here, so I'm going to leave. So you have to be careful of that as well, and
Hmm.
that's something to be mindful of. Another element that goes along with training is realistic job previews, and our colleagues at UMN have been doing a lot of work on this, helping states develop kind of statewide realistic job previews that can be used by provider agencies across the states. They're videos or other formats in which people really get an idea of what the work is, both the good things, the risky things, the scary things, the intimate things, everything involved in the DSP work, in a realistic way. So it's not trying to paint a job that doesn't really exist, but it's also not going to try to show it as completely challenging and no upsides. So it's realistic and as realistic as it can possibly be. So people are really aware of what they're going to be doing and can make a decision about whether or not that job is made for them. Another thing is supporting people as they deal with their normal life challenges. So people might need to deal with their own family caregiving responsibilities, or they might have trouble with their transportation. And instead of just not showing up for work, for example, when you have a challenge like that, states can support providers to potentially provide support to people when they're dealing with those challenges. So things like employee resource networks are things that we've been hearing about in Ohio and Georgia, are looking at those. I know Georgia is looking at implementing it at the state level, and it would be it's basically like a way for DSPs who, as Laura mentioned, work very, very separately and independently, to come together and have a kind of a basis for to help them navigate some of the challenges that they might have. So it comes with a coach. The coach would help the employees to access loans or look into childcare opportunities or other kinds of family caregiving opportunities. It's like an EAP, an employee assistance program, but geared towards people who have some other challenges related to income and financials. So those are some strategies that states have looked into.
That's so cool. So I learned about employee resource networks. I don't know if that was 6 months or a year ago, but not that long ago. And the person I was talking to was one of the main implementers in their region. And one of the things that they stuck out to me, I was kind of like, well, is this like an EAP? And they're like, yes and no. In some ways, because the goal of EAP is certainly to connect employees with resources, for sure. But they said the way that it's set up, like with the coaches and things, like they get utilized. I want to say that she told me something like 4 times as often or 5 times as often.
That would make sense.
And that it's not, I don't know, it's a little bit less like calling a 1-800 number and you're not sure who's going to pick up the other line. It's more like those coaches
Personal.
end up getting known throughout the agency, like, oh, that's who that is, or through, it could be multiple agencies pulling together. Actually, I think was her in the model that she was using for multiple, and they weren't even actually all IDD providers. I think there was actually a couple other small mid-sized businesses, not the huge ones, but small and mid-sized businesses that were also partnering in with this as well. And so it seemed like it seemed like a really neat thing as she was describing it. So I had no idea that. So Georgia's going to pilot that, like incentivize that at the state.
They're discussing it at the state level. They've
it.
discussed it. Yeah. I'm not really I can't tell you exactly what the progress is at this time, but I thought that was just a very interesting thing. And
very innovative.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we won't hold you to that, state of Georgia, but we're rooting for you. We're cheering you on. We want to hear how it goes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there is a perspective that might say that connecting people, having a Medicaid funded service that the workers then have to also access public benefits, and then you're providing them help to better access public benefits instead of actually raising the wages. It might be kind of the background, what's a backwards way to deal with the issue. But the fact is, the way that rates and wages are defined, it's slow. It's really slow. And it's, as we mentioned, it's really there's a long way to go before we reach a living wage. So it's important to support workers where they are right now.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That it could seem, I mean, I totally see what you're saying with that. And at the same time, I mean, I certainly don't know what it looks like to roll it out on a large scale, but I imagine getting employee resource networks set up is probably far, far less money than raising a wage, even an incremental amount, just because you just multiply that by like a really big number.
Exactly.
And so
it can be so supportive. Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Well, that's really cool. So we've kind of already been talking a little bit about wages, but let's kind of go in that a little bit more. As the wages are going up, I guess what is the gap between so 17 something was like the average, I think you had said earlier, Laura. What's a living wage now? I understand it's different if you're in Manhattan or if you're in, small town, middle America.
Right.
But is there kind of what kind of a gap are we talking about? Is it, do you guys have any? I mean, I could Google that, I'm sure, but now that we're already on it.
Yeah, I think we kind of have a chart that kind of highlights for states. The thing that's interesting about the median wage too, Nate, is that the range across states is huge. It is so variable, and it's not necessarily related to what that state minimum wage is either. So it's
fascinating.
It's a wild picture if you look at it in graphical form. But I don't think any state is paying a living wage for their DSPs at this time. Some are closer than others.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Can I share my screen? Is that allowed?
Let's give it a shot. I've never tried it. Let's give it a shot and see what happens.
Sure. So here you can see the 2023 median hourly wage for DSPs in each of the participating states, and then the living wage at that state. And the living wage comes from the livingwage.mit.edu, which is a reputable source where they've calculated this information. And it's based on the living expenses of people who are living in these states. Now, it varies by city, as you mentioned. So we were only able to get a state level view, but there's a big gap there in most states. And I will point out that the living wage that we've shown here is the living wage for one adult, no children. So,
which is not the
Yeah.
situation
No.
for
no,
the vast majority of
No.
this
No.
workforce.
Most people
Right.
have dependents, spouses. Yep.
Yeah.
I do see
Okay.
that it looks like South Dakota
Mm-hmm.
is close, if not hitting the living wage there.
Yeah, for one
Oh,
adult.
so they have a disproportionately high, in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
in wage for the direct support professional workforce, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Because South Dakota is going to be not one of the higher cost of living states.
Right.
Correct.
I'm confident
That's
of
right.
that. I
That's
might not
right.
know exactly where it lands, but I'm sure it's not what.
It's not number one for sure. It's not
it's just not-
California. Yeah. Not
No,
New-
where it's not New York or
They have-
Massachusetts or California.
They also have a higher ratio of empty jobs to people. Is that right? So that their unemployment rate is much lower, and they are looking for workers in South Dakota. So it
Mhm.
makes sense that they try to create a competitive wage there.
Okay. Are you saying that they have higher vacancies or lower vacancies? Let me see if I got that right.
So I'm not talking about DSPs in particular. In general, I was actually just looking at something about the
Okay.
unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate in South Dakota is pretty low, and they are there are more open jobs positions to people in South Dakota. So I think it's
They
that
have to
oil
have more
money.
competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have to have more competitive wages. Yeah. That makes
I
sense.
see. So they're like, move here, start working here for us.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Totally.
As a state. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm,
Got
mhm.
it. All right. Well, that was really helpful graphic that you just shared there to kind of see that as it's playing out. Beyond wages, you guys had mentioned earlier a little bit about some of the other benefits, whether that's related to childcare, healthcare. Um, are these making a dent when it comes to helping providers recruit staff or keep staff? Is there at least correlation data that would indicate
Mhm.
that?
It's been hard to say. There are states that have looked into, at the state level, what contributes to people staying longer in their jobs, and benefits have definitely shown to impact that. But I think one of the major benefits of providing benefits is that it professionalizes the career, and it shows workers that they are valued,
Valued.
that their lives are valued, that they are worthy of receiving the professional support that comes with benefits like paid time off, vacation time, sick time, health insurance. I mean, that's a complicated one too with the public benefits and the subsidies that are currently available. But yeah, I think that one of the main benefits of people joining joining an organization that provides benefits is feeling that their work is being valued. Because the fact is, as we mentioned, a lot of workers are living in poverty, and so money going into a retirement account, for example, that they need right now might not be the best support that they need at the time. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
I think we learned a lot, as Dorothy said. Kind of the silver lining in COVID is, some of the great things we learned, especially around supporting DSPs, and kind of like Dorothy just said, the benefits they need a lot of times are the benefits they to get them through the day, basically. If they have a sick child, is there a way that the provider or something can support childcare so that they can still come to work? If they have unreliable transportation, is there a way to get them to work? And being flexible with, hours that you need DSPs to work? Can you kind of meet them where they are and work around their schedule? So I think we learned a lot. And knowing that the majority of our workforce is female, it's really important to think about what are those benefits that are most important to a female who's often, caregiver for the family, caregiver for children. Um, how does that look different? And what should we be focusing on because of that demographic?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Wow, wow, wow. Great insights and so interesting to hear from this different angle and to get kind of that bigger picture look at what's going on, not just in my neck of the woods or your neck of the woods, but across the whole country. Very, very cool. Now, I always try to leave you with an actionable next step, something you could do right away. Well, this is probably kind of obvious, but I strongly encourage you, check out the results from the survey that's referenced and all this research that they've done. They have some really neat charts and easy to look at where you don't have to dive into every single number to get some good takeaways. Of course, check out the link in the show notes to be able to do that. But I want to give you one other thing along those lines. When you're looking at the results from the survey, and it'd be very natural to see how your organization stacks up, I don't want you to feel discouraged if you feel as though you're doing worse than other organizations, or I don't want you to be complacent if you feel like, well, we're doing a lot better than most other organizations. But I want to encourage you, take that information and then just look at what's one thing that we could do to improve, to make our organization a little bit better of a place to work, to support our workforce just a little bit more. And think about translating how you stack up, not so that you can feel either overly proud or overly discouraged, but instead as to spur you on towards action in making your organization an even better place to work. Well, I have so much respect for the work that my guests are doing, for the work that you're doing, and really my hat's off to you. So until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.